Those who have been to a ruined wedding. What happened? The mother of the groom was an alcoholic for many years. She decided to quit drinking cold turkey a few days before his wedding. During the reception, she had a seizure and was taken to the hospital via ambulance. The wedding was at a state park that's famous for its giant gorge waterfall. I don't know whose idea this was, but someone suggested a photo overlooking this gorge and everybody was game. The wedding party went around a stone security barrier and the maid of honor literally fell off the cliff to her death. It was like 500+ feet. Leading up to my friend's wedding, his father had been battling cancer after a terminal diagnosis, and it was touch and go whether he would be well enough to attend the wedding. In the end, he was too unwell to attend despite wishing that he could. Just as we got to the wedding reception, my friend was informed that his father had just passed away. It was devastating. I played a wedding where as we started playing the set, everyone ran outside and nobody was to be seen for the rest of the night. I originally assumed it was because nobody liked us, but the bride came in afterwards and said there was a huge fight involving multiple members of both families and everyone basically went home upset, injured or in a police van. We couldn't stop playing since we were paid and it was our job. And the only person watching was the drunk uncle dancing on his own asking for requests we didn't know. When I was 6 or 7, I went to a cousin's wedding. Everything was fabulous for little me. So much sugar everywhere. Basically heaven. The reception was in a big community center that was reserved for the occasion. Went to the girls' bathroom. Passing by the men's room to see my uncle on the floor. Went back to the main room to tell my dad my uncle was looking weird. Well, uncle had a stroke and had died. The bride spent the rest of the afternoon crying. And everyone except close family left. Bright side is the mariage is still going strong 20 years later. Despite what happened that day. No one turned up to the reception except myself and partner. There was about 8 people in total and the couple had went all out for the reception. Awkward. Was a guest of friend of the bride. Did not know anyone attending. Very expensive over the top place. Several hundred guests of this very Italian wedding. Maid of honor grabs mic at the cocktail hour, begins her speech. Rambling, drunk. Quickly devolves to stating the recently deceased mother of the bride was against this wedding and that's basically what killed her. Plus Vinny will never give up prostitutes. She is tackled by several people and dragged away. The happy couple is separated and divorced within a year. Groom got so drunk the night before he couldn't make it to the altar at the ceremony. They still had the ceremony with only the bride and her party, plus one of the groomsmen, who apparently didn't get wasted. Everyone there was shaking their heads the entire time. The groom did make one singular appearance for a few seconds at the reception. He looked like a zombie and was wearing street clothes. And this was no trashy wedding. The bride was a professional dancer for a major label pop star. So that gives you an idea of the type of people that were in attendance. 200+ people at the ceremony alone. Probably double that at the reception. They divorced within 6 months. Attended a wedding reception and was seated near the cameraman. An aunt of mine was sitting closer to the camera and spent the evening commenting and gossiping about everyone. And much of it came out on the video. The cameraman was great. He did 2 copies. One edited and the other no holds barred. The unedited version is the stuff of legend. Father of the bride died suddenly 3 days before the wedding. Pre-COVID. Single quote. Daddy-daughter. Dance was mom, bride, and picture of dad. Same with walking down the aisle to give her away. Lots of tears. Not many smiles. Even the bartender at the hotel knew the night before and was talking about it with me. The bride's father was 45 minutes late to walk his daughter down the aisle. While we were waiting, the air conditioning broke in the venue. It was over 100 degrees outside and humid AF. The place was overcrowded. You could barely move without bumping into someone else, and in the heat that was extra miserable. I guess the air conditioning problem had also affected the refrigeration or something because most of the food was spoiled. The only food on the buffet was salad, spaghetti and rolls. Not enough to feed even half the guests. Most people left after the first dance. 2 of the bride's aunts fainted. The bride and the wedding planner were crying. It was a big wedding. Over 300 people. Turns out the bride had been having an affair with her cousin's husband. The cousin had known for a little bit, but waited until the wedding to go table to table, letting everyone know the bride was sleeping with her husband. Poor groom was blindsided. Worst part was his father-in-law was well off and opened up a restaurant for him. Well, he lost his wife and his restaurant. Best friend's mom got remarried and had an expensive, beautiful wedding, but for some reason didn't hire a DJ. Last minute her mom asked me to manage the CD and gave me a list along with verbal instructions of when to play each. I tried to warn her that I simply did not follow. But she told me she had confidence in me. Apparently all her life she wanted to walk down the aisle to some specific song. But I just couldn't figure it out. They had to get walking to match the sunset. So she went ahead down the aisle while I flipped through a series of incorrect songs to the horror, amusement of the crowd. For years after, when I called my friend's house and her stepdad answered, He'd say, "Is this the guy who frocked up my wedding? How are ya?" Not me. But my elder cousin's story. He attended a wedding where the bride and groom got scammed by the wedding organizer. 1 hour before the wedding event. Nothing there in the room. No food. No decorations. Just few tables, and basically it feels like unused ballroom. The bride and groom realized the wedding organizer scammed them, and the wedding organizer took the money to bought themselves a big ol' house. When the bride and groom decide to see the wedding organizer, they caught him sleeping in his house. It became a national TV news here, and the wedding organizer got sued by few brides and grooms that got scammed by them. 2. Drunk mother of the bride stumbled, fell, and rolled into a lake. This was one I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception, photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaids, so they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. Bride landed and dislocated her knee. Then passed out and kept going in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance who turned up and fixed her knee, etc. But she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and threw up down her dress, and had to sit with her mum in another room while everyone else danced, etc. Felt so bad for her as she spent the rest of the evening crying. Maybe not ruined, but it definitely got tense. Started with the best man, groom's brother, just absolutely roasting the bride and her parents. Basically called them gold diggers and stuff in front of several hundred family and friends. Then they cut the cake. Apparently, the groom was told under no uncertain terms not to shove cake in her face. Well, he did it anyway, and she stormed off, not to be seen for 20 minutes. Reception went on as planned. She got wasted, and I'm told she passed out that night in the middle of the street while still in her wedding dress. Pure class. They're divorced now. I was invited to the reception of one of my good friends. They had been courthouse married for months and living happily. When I arrived at the location and saw the big crowd, I knew something was wrong. Friend's wife is prone to panic attacks and is extremely agoraphobic to the point of breaking down and crying if she is overwhelmed. Immediately call friend and ask what's going on and if this was okay. Turns out friend's parents invited everyone possible to be there without my friend knowing. After I sent him a picture of the crowd, him and his wife thought it would be better to go on a second honeymoon than have a reception. He sent a message apologizing to all those his wife and him invited and telling them to leave without telling his parents. Parents had a meltdown as we left. Aussie bride married into Russian family. There was vodka bottles on every table. The bride tried to keep up with the vodka shots. I was impressed at her effort. Then she disappeared for a couple of hours, and didn't move much for the rest of the night. This was around 2009. On the second day of the wedding, the bride went swimming in the ocean. It took place in Tenerife. She swam out too far and was basically lost at sea for 9 hours or so. She eventually found her way back but was in bad shape. Everyone was panicked the whole day and thought she drowned. By the time she got back, she wished she had. Her husband found her phone and read a bunch of messages supposedly from her aunt, but it was quickly clear from the 6E content it wasn't her aunt at all. She had been having an affair with the best man for apparently years. They got an annulment shortly after. 60,000 down the drain. One of the most opulent weddings I've ever been to. We attended a wedding for family member who didn't have a lot of money. It was hosted at an inexpensive venue but was nice. My heart broke when only a third of the people invited showed up. You could see the hurt in the couple's face. They came up to our table and said, "Do you have any friends in city?" We lived an hour away. They had all this food for 100 people but only 30 guests. They were willing to have complete strangers come down just so their money and food wouldn't go to waste. We hadn't handed over our card with cash inside yet, so my husband hit the ATM and added another $100. Hurricane Ivan. Our wedding was scheduled for Friday and the hurricane hit us dead center on Thursday. We were sitting around with no power on Friday and remembered that a neighbor was a pastor. So my partner and I just knocked on his front door and asked if he would just marry us in the front yard. So the big church wedding was canceled, but instead I got married in the front yard with chainsaws and stuff in the background. Been married 17 years now. A fight broke out between father of the bride, brother of the bride, and some guy that just happened to be staying at the hotel. In reality, I don't know how much of a fight it was. More just the dad and brother assaulting some man. So anyway, they were both arrested. Cut to the bride sobbing at breakfast because her dad and brother spent the evening of her wedding in jail and now face assault charges for what they did to this poor man. The groom's father groped both the bride and his daughter, my then girlfriend, multiple times each, ended up getting punched out by his son, and locked in a minivan for a few hours until he sobered up. Edit. Half the questions are the same, and the answer is yes. He groped his own daughter, as well as his son's wife. Edit 2. Dude was belligerently drunk. Had been punched. And if memory serves correct, had his hands duct taped behind his back. That's how he was able to be locked in a minivan, child locks on the rear, and too drunk to find a way to hit the unlock in the front seats while his hands were taped. A friend of my girlfriend was getting married. The wedding was quite normal. They got married in the local church and then there was the party in a nice restaurant. The photographer asked the bride and her bridesmaids, my girlfriend was one of them, to go outside for some photos. Some minutes later one of the bridesmaids come back asking for help. There were some swans that attacked the photographer and the majority of the people around him were not doing anything much more than laughing at this guy who was running around and screaming. Not as dramatic as some of the comments on here but very awkward. Was at a lovely wedding, really romantic, all candlelit. And the reception was lovely. Best man made a good speech, then at the end he said everybody raise your glasses to. He said the groom's name and then accidentally called the new bride the ex-wife's name, of the groom. This didn't ruin the whole wedding, but it surely didn't brighten my day. After the ceremony we were standing in front of the altar and people took turns to congratulate us. As it was my mother's turn she took my hand and told me she's sorry she raised such a bad person like me. Thank God my husband doesn't speak her language well. My own. It rained and was cold. No one bothered to turn the lights on so the few pictures I have are dark and grainy. My parents divorced earlier that year so my dad hated seeing mom for the first time and didn't stick around to get a picture with me. My husband's mom didn't even take off work to attend. Apparently the money was more important. Good news is that we just celebrated our 49th wedding anniversary. Editing to thank everyone won the kind words and rewards. This is the biggest response I got since joining Reddit. Thank you. The poor bride started her menstrual cycle on her big day, and she was nauseated and in pain all day. She couldn't eat any of the buffet because her stomach hurt too much, and anything she tried to eat ended up being vomited back up. She couldn't even stand properly either because of her cramps. She stayed seated. In most of the wedding photos, she's grimacing instead of smiling because she was so ill. Was invited to a wedding of a friend's friend, because she didn't have enough own people to get the reception as big as she wanted it to be. Also the bride and groom were super young. Got pregnant 3 months after hooking up and marrying for all the wrong reasons. Party starts. Whole atmosphere is forced and strained. Everybody knows the whole thing is fake in a way, so I decide to spend my time outside with the smokers. Having a wonderful time until we can hear screaming inside and the bride runs past us very Hollywood style, all teary and dramatic. Turns out the ice cake wasn't stored properly. Was slightly defrosting and a little lopsided. Bride didn't come back. Cake was really nice. Couple got divorced 9 months later. $28,000 wedding paid for by the father of the bride. Groom gets alcohol poisoning and goes to the hospital 30 minutes before. Not a happy papa, but there was plenty of extra $600 cake. Not me but a close friend. Wedding photographer. Waiting at the altar the best man announced that the groom was coming out as gay and the wedding was cancelled. Everyone laughed like it was a best man joke. But no, it was very serious. Bride was on the way in the car. She was not happy. All the guests had to wait while they sorted their lives out. In the end they split the reception room in two and each family had their own dinners. Needless to say, they didn't want the photos. It happened to my uncle's neighbor when they were attending his wedding. His poor mother was wearing a pacemaker that couldn't take all the commotion of the wedding. People didn't notice she's dead until someone went over to her table. Everything went sour. Honeymoon cancelled. Month-long mourning. Just a sad evening. The groom caught the bride in the toilets with another guy at the reception. He forgave her but after 2 months or so he caught her again with another guy, a third one. When I was maybe 4 or 5 I walked in on my uncle's wife to be and her maid of honor kissing the night before the ceremony. Little kid me must have casually dropped this into conversation with my dad. It all unraveled from there. I wish I remembered more as frankly it is some top-tier family drama and my uncle has always been an arsehole. I remember them jumping apart and her crouching to my level to say, "Hi, name. What are you doing here? I'm name. I'm going to be your auntie." A coworker was at one of best friend's wedding. There were very specific rules about the food, no nuts. There were a couple people there, including the maid of honor who were severely allergic. The venue served something that had nuts. Maid of honor went anaphylactic. EpiPen was not effective, and she died on the way to the hospital. Needless to say, there are lawsuits abound. My wedding was ruined by a tornado. It touched down about 15 minutes after the ceremony was over, and ended up being one of my favorite memories of my wedding. All of the extra people we had to invite didn't go to the reception because of it, so it ended up being a great party. All of our outdoor decorations were ruined, but oh well. Plus got a few badass pictures of me and the missus, with storm clouds and green skies. I worked at a historic house that was used as a wedding and party venue. It was very early 1800s. 2 floors. And upstairs was the bride's ready room. It was one of those picturesque TV-looking venues. I learned 2 things there. 1, there seemed to be a lot of women who want to get frocked in their wedding dresses by someone other than the groom just before the wedding. And 2, 200-plus-year-old buildings have incredibly thin floors. During the mixed-gender bachelor party, the bride-to-be got in a spat with the groom and slept with another guy. Wedding was off the next morning. They lost $10,000 plus. He took her back a couple of months later. Not as funny as some of these stories, but power went out. Vicar started going on about rings and putting Vaseline on them, which we all started hysterically laughing about in the church pews. Because we are immature children. One best man left really early because he hated the new wife. The other one got so drunk that after breaking sit and standing on tables, he got kicked out by the police. After loudly telling everyone the groom shouldn't have married her. It was an absolute mess. No one thought they should have married. We had a fab time. Got annihilated drunk. They're divorced now. The groom's brother was the best man. The bride's sisters were her maid of honor and bridesmaids. The best man, brother's wife, was unhappy she hadn't been asked to be a bridesmaid too. So, she convinced the best man to not show up to the wedding with no warning. We sat in the church for almost an hour while they tried to find the best man. The groom was despondent that his brother just wouldn't show. A friend stood up and filled in for the best man. Relationships were never the same. Not ruined, but marred. My ex-wife's grandmother was in her 90s, in a wheelchair. While we're up at the altar, she won't shut up about the flowers and they might need water. She's not talking quietly to her neighbor. She's yelling in her old lady voice. She didn't have dementia. She was very with it. She had no volume control, or what she was doing was inappropriate. She thought the flowers need water. They looked terrible. She yelled. One of the cousins, without saying anything, got up and started to just wheel her out. "Where are we going?" she yelled. We all got chuckle at grandma and went on with the ceremony. Edit. Let me say that she was a very lovely woman. She just had a loud opinion at that moment. Bride and groom plan wedding at Caribbean Island Resort. Friends and family book their trip. Groom caught cheating a week before wedding. Wedding called off. It was too late to cancel trip to get refunds, so mostly everyone, including the bride, went to the Caribbean Island Resort. The groom did not go, but his family and friends did to go, and they supported to the bride. Everyone put on a brave face, trying to have a good time. There was an air of sadness about the whole thing behind fake smiles. Looking back at the group pictures that were taken is heartbreaking. The bride stopped near all contact with her friends and family. To this day, years later, after the trip, I think a part of her died from this experience. Wedding scheduled for March 14, 2020. A lot happened in the preceding approximately 3 days and their venue cancelled about 24 hours prior. Bride was devastated. But the groom and the brother of the bride, along with the bridal party, 2 dogs, pulled an all-nighter and the ceremony went on in the happy couple's backyard. Wedding was technically ruined, but it was an excellent reminder that the marriage is the important part of the ceremony. Not something I experienced myself. But my best friend is the son of the best man and the bride. He was conceived at the wedding and raised by the bride and groom. The bride miscarried during the reception. My mother was a church organist and attended many weddings. I suppose the story that stands out was of the bride who, when asked, "Do you take this man?" broke down and said, "No, I can't, I don't love him," and ran out of the church. It was a smallish town. People found out that she had met somebody new, fallen hopelessly in love with him. I play in wedding bands and I kinda have too. Father of the bride drops dead at the ceremony. The reception is delayed. We're all standing around wondering if there will even be one. After an hour or so, the people show up, and we have a sort or party. I guess that one's not too bad. Father of the bride is doing the dance with the bride, in a very, very seductive and gross way. Like, WTF gross. The groom walked up, punched him square in the face, and dropped and was taken away to be attended to. Never woke back up. I guess FOBs should watch out if I'm playing at their wedding. Big wedding. Around 500 people. All the future wife's doing. She wanted the huge $70,000 wedding. I was a groomsman, pre-wedding. He's nervous as hell. All these people. Has to be perfect. This is her dream wedding. Yada yada. So, at some point the whiskey gets pulled out. It went from a calm the nerves few shots to he's just about finished the bottle. We give him water, get him in the shower, and redressed. It's go time. Midway through her vows, he pukes all down the front of her dress. It was horrible. But it was great. They're going on 8 years strong. Bride was way more interested in a male guest than her new husband. Bride had to be found for every occasion and it took an hour to find her for the cake cutting. She was caught frocking the male guest in her and the groom's room. Fight breaks out and the wedding is split in 2. Oddly, the bride's family are against her and they profusely apologize to the groom. Marriage is annulled and the bride goes with the male guest. Now, with the pandemic, the bride has been trying to get with the groom because the male guest is a lazy bum. And she lives in a city apartment with barely anything. I was a groomsman at a wedding where the maid of honor was so drunk she kept knocking over a lit candle during the ceremony. While the bride and groom were signing the marriage certificate, she knocked the candle over, setting the bride's dress on fire. Luckily it was small and no one was hurt. The bride wanted to keep going with the ceremony, but then the maid of honor knocked over a different candle. I walked across the front of the ceremony and blew out every candle that she could possibly reach and then set the maid of honor on a stool. Start to finish this was about 2 minutes. Some friendships were strengthened that day while others were ruined. The groom was arrested for CSA 5 minutes before the wedding. The guests were confused because they didn't know what was going on. The bride decided to have the wedding anyway without him and had a mock wedding with his son, on the groom's behalf, to symbolically marry the groom anyway, and then everyone danced and had a great time. I kid you not. I went to the wedding of a friend of my girlfriend. We sat waiting for 35 minutes before we was told it was off. Turned out the best man and the groom were caught in a rather risky position. Turns out the groom was only getting married to please his Catholic family. Girlfriend friend was so embarrassed she left the country and we have not heard from her since. The groom and the best man are now married and run a B&B in the Lake District, I think. Update. Wow, a lot of votes on this one. Tried to reply to as many as I can. To put people at ease, I will see if I can dig around some friends of ours and get an update to see if anyone knows where the bride is these days and post a small update as soon as I hear anything. Wedding itself was fine I guess, but everyone on the buffet line was very openly taking bets on how soon the bride would start having affairs. I said 6 months and I was 4 months over. The marriage lasted a year. Happened to my classmate. He is successful middle-level manager. Divorced. About 35 yo or so. Found a girl of his dreams but from a provincial poor town. The girl insisted to have the wedding in her town to show off her success. The wedding is crashed by her old friends, including male friends who are not that sophisticated and have some tense feelings towards the successful groom from the city. Somebody starts a fight in the middle of wedding. Groom is trying to stop it and got stabbed in the back. Died right there. And he was my classmate. I was in the wedding party and the bride's family are a little bit country. Not that there's anything wrong with that. For the entire weekend they were the most fun. The wedding was outdoors at the groom's family's country club. The brother of the bride gave her away. He was plastered before 10 a.m. and during the vows he decided he couldn't wait until the ceremony was over to relieve himself. He thought he was ducking behind the mountain of flowers at the altar, but didn't go far enough. My favorite wedding photo is the bride saying her vows laughing and in the background is her brother's bare butt cheeks as he's relieving himself. I was at a family wedding where my cousin's daughter was subbing in for the bride to trick the groom into pulling off her garter belt with his teeth and other guys volunteered too. My cousin looks at me and, with no irony whatsoever, says something to the effect of, "Why don't you go do that too?" with a big smile on his face. Nope, 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 nope. Used to work at a wedding venue place and one time as the couple were being driven up to the on-site log cabin, we had a severe storm and trees had blown over. The pond just outside the cabin the next day had burst and washed away the one shingle driveway to get there. I heard from the chauffeur the next day that the bride had been in tears of fear on the way up there. The next morning they had to be retrieved by an old beat-up Land Rover that a farmer helped with. Didn't happen to me. But I work in the wedding industry out in New England. Someone threw a cigarette into mulch next to the wedding venue and the whole place went up in flames during, I believe, the ceremony. Silver linings though. They rebuilt the venue and it looks a heck of a lot better now. The groom's sisters slapped the bride on the dance floor. Meanwhile, the groom was dancing with his friends and had no idea what was happening. Edit. Holy shit guys, I've never had so many upvotes before. Thank you so much. A lot of stories involve alcohol. Lol. I went to a wedding where the maid of honor made it through the wedding but she spent the whole reception passed out on the floor in the bathroom. At my own big Italian wedding open bar, shots etc. When we received our wedding video, the videographer said he made a separate video for us with all the outtakes. They all involved drunk people and funny stories that were inappropriate for the official video. My college-age kids watch it and love it. I wasn't there, but my parents' wedding. They had a very small wedding, nothing big and just family and close friends afterwards. In my mom's apartment, she apparently had big music boxes on the wall, just standing on the supports. She never screwed them tight. Music was loud. Boxes moved. Box fell down on my mom's head. Party was instantly over. She got in an ambulance, etc. She's fine and doesn't have any lasting effects. But the night was over. A wedding at a family member's property. Ceremony in an open field. Reception followed in a very nice barn. Property owners didn't want smoking in the barn and didn't want cigarette butts scattered all across the property, so set up a nice smoking area next to the barn under a big tree. Tables. chairs, ashtrays, lots of shade and a nice breeze through the area. The bride's entire family spent the whole evening in the smoking area chain smoking, whining about not being able to smoke in the barn. When the father-daughter dance was announced and the bride was standing in the middle of the dance floor, dad was nowhere to be found. She ended up having to go out to the smoking area and drag him inside to have the dance. Wife's friend as the bride. Nicest girl you'll ever meet marrying a deadbeat obese frat boy. Literally a dig of a personality. To give you an example, while they were engaged he would tell her about how he had previously had perfect weeks, where he slept with a different girl every night. Literal human garbage. Pretty sure he was saying that to try and make himself seem more desirable in a frocked up way. Long story short, he drank way too much at the wedding, threw up and passed out at the reception, and had to be taken to their hotel on their wedding night, ruining everything for her. Frock that guy. I went to one where the reception was in a field with a marquee. I didn't know anyone because I was a +1. The cake melted and fell over before the married couple arrived. Wasps got into and died in the pims that was to be offered out. A bridesmaid got stung. I later bonded with a stranger over fear of spiders when some ran across the table. We were packed in tight, couldn't escape, and made a scene. The generator broke down after sunset, so the lighting cut out and music stopped. Someone played music on their phone and we lit candles. The couple actually took it all in their stride and didn't let it bother them. One of the most fun weddings I've been to. Groom overheard a member of the wedding party gossiping with the catering staff about the bride's secondary career in sex work. Not completely ruined, but I've been to a wedding where the priest's whole sermon was a 30 minutes long talk on infidelity. And how is often because the women don't treat their husbands adequately.